This knife has a straight edge on it, so it's very easy. And maybe in our world here, there lives a happy little mountain.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin. I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of university and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. So we're going to very quickly, before I get into this case, address the obvious. I have dyed my hair again. As always, if you've been a long time viewer of this channel, you know that every other year or so I pretty much jump between my natural blonde, which is kind of a little bit lighter than this colour, and dark brown. So I've jumped from a very dark, verging on black coloured hair to a kind of dark blonde. I'm not sure what colour it's coming up on camera, obviously, because I'm using very artificial lights. But the aim is obviously to go blonde, so that's kind of what's happening. You're probably going to see my hair change a little bit over the course of these videos these next couple of months, because obviously going from such a dark colour, I want to gradually lighten it rather than just destroying it completely. So I think that's enough. I think that's everything I wanted to mention, just obviously mentioning the obvious. So today we're going to be discussing it's not really an individual case, it's something that's quite interesting, that obviously is quite well known because there was one particular case involved with what I'm going to discuss today that is very, very well known, very discussed across virtually all like true crime, conspiracy theory, everything like that YouTube channels, as well as just in general. It's a very widely known case, and it's also been made quite popular, or like not popular, I guess widely known, publicly known, through factors such as being featured or inspiring one of the seasons of American Horror Story. So there's a lot like that. It's quite a well-known thing. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard about it. So today I want to discuss some of the, well, I mean all of the many strange occurrences. The list is so long. Strange deaths, suicides, everything like that happened in a place called the CECIL Hotel. So pretty much I'm just going to run through each of like the timeline pretty much of each of these strange occurrences that happened in this hotel over the years. It's very, very strange, so I thought it would be something kind of interesting to discuss today. So if you want to hear a little bit about these strange occurrences, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. When I began initially researching what the Cecil Hotel actually was, the main sort of descriptor that was used to explain the actual hotel was referring to it as a budget hotel. So it was something that obviously isn't a motel, but it isn't the most luxurious, high-class, expensive hotel you can stay in. So it's located in Los Angeles, and it was opened in the year 1927. So for its first few years, it didn't really encounter anything strange. There were no weird occurrences, nothing bad happened to it. It seemed to be surviving pretty successfully, doing well as a business, thriving in this sort of budget hotel label. However, this changed in the year 1931 when all of these strange occurrences began happening. It all began on November 19th, 1931, when a 46-year-old man named W.K. Norton was found dead in his hotel room in the Cecil Hotel. Investigators had found that he'd been staying in the hotel for a week prior to his death, or at least to the discovery of his death, but he had actually checked in under a different name. So he checked in under the name James Willis, or Willis, I'm not sure exactly how it was supposed to be pronounced. He wrote down his details as saying that he was from Chicago, whilst W.K. Norton, the man himself, was actually from a place called Manhattan Beach in California. They were later able to determine that he'd actually died as a result of ingesting poisonous capsules in an act of suicide. And this was the first recorded suicide that took place inside the Cecil Hotel since its opening, but it would by far not be the last. In September of the following year, a 25-year-old man named Benjamin Dodosh, I think is how you pronounce it, again, I'm sorry, he was discovered also dead inside his hotel room in the Hotel Cecil, and he was discovered by a maid who was working at the time. Investigators determined that he had died as a result of a gunshot wound to the head, which they ruled down as being a self-inflicted wound. They obviously searched through all of his belongings, and what's quite saddening is that they didn't really find anything like a suicide note, anything left for his loved ones, no reason for why he committed suicide, nothing really that could help explain anything. 2 years later, in July of 1934, 53-year-old Sergeant Louis D. Borden was found dead in his hotel room. He was a former medic in the army, and according to quite a number of notes, like suicide notes he'd left around his room, obviously written before he'd killed himself, he had stated that the reason for him committing suicide was because of a series or a number of really serious and severe medical issues that he was having. So he was quite an ill man, he was having a lot of health problems, and he decided to commit suicide. When he was found, it was determined that he died as a result of cutting his own throat with a razor. 3 years later, in March of 1937, a woman named Grace E. Magro, she was 25 years old, and she was found after falling from her 9th floor window in the hotel. What's really quite brutal about this incident in particular is that she hadn't fallen directly onto the ground. After she jumped, she'd gotten tangled up in all of the telephone wires just outside the window. So rather than being killed on impact on the ground, she'd actually gotten caught and caused herself some really severe injuries from which she actually survived. Once she was found and removed from the telephone wire, she was taken straight to hospital, which is where she sadly later died as a result of her severe injuries. Investigators were never able to conclusively determine just whether her death was a result of an accident or an act of murder, as in she was pushed out the window, or whether she had committed suicide herself. Grace Magro had been staying in the hotel room in the Hotel Cecil with a man. His name was M.W. Madison, and he was a sailor. He was obviously immediately questioned just to rule out or see whether they needed to pursue the route of foul play being involved, and he was unable to provide or conceive any plausible reason, explanation for why she would want to commit suicide. So he obviously declared that he was innocent. He said he had nothing to do with it, but he also couldn't come up with a reason as to why she would have jumped. The following January, a man named Roy Thompson, who had been a marine fireman, had been staying in the Hotel Cecil. After staying in the hotel for a few weeks, he was found dead on the skylight of the building next door to the hotel, having jumped from the top floor of the hotel, and his death was ruled as a suicide. The next death came on May of 1939, when employees of the hotel discovered 39-year-old naval officer Erwin C. Neblett dead in his room. And investigators had determined that his cause of death had been poisonous capsules that he had also ingested in an act of suicide. In January 1940, 45-year-old Dorothy Seeger, I think is how you pronounce it, she was found and taken to hospital after she had ingested poisonous capsules. She was reported by local newspapers at the time, straight after the being alerted of what happened in the hotel. They immediately reported her as being close to death. So when she was in hospital, she was in a near-death condition. But past this, there are no official reports of what happened to her, whether she survived or not. There was nothing. In September of 1944, 19-year-old Dorothy Jean Purcell had been sharing a room in the hotel with 38-year-old Ben Levine. Now, Dorothy had allegedly been pregnant but completely unaware of it. So she was staying in the hotel with Ben Levine when she suddenly found herself going into labour. She claimed that in order to avoid waking up Ben in bed while he was asleep, she took herself straight to the bathroom where she proceeded to give birth to her son. She went on to claim that she believed that the baby had been stillborn when in fact he wasn't. He was perfectly healthy. And because she thought he was dead, she threw him out of the window, after which he landed on the roof of the next door neighbouring building, and this sadly killed him instantly. Dorothy Purcell was tried for the murder of her newborn son, but she was relieved of all charges after it was found that she was not sound of mind, so she managed to avoid the charges by pleading insanity, and she was actually taken to a psychiatric hospital. Yet another suicide occurred in November of 1947 when 35-year-old Robert Smith jumped from a window on the 7th floor of the hotel. And then on October 22nd, 1954, 55-year-old Helen Gurney jumped from a 7th floor window, which she was staying in a room on the 7th floor. She landed directly on the marquee of the Cecil Hotel, and they weren't able to immediately identify her because she had also checked under a false name as a few of the previous victims had. So she checked under the name Margaret Brown, which obviously made it relatively difficult for them to immediately identify her. In February of 1962, a 50-year-old woman named Julia Frances Moore committed suicide by jumping from her 8th floor room window. So the police immediately obviously checked her room and they found no sign of any notes, like a suicide note or anything. All they found was a bus ticket from St. Louis, some change, and a bank book showing a balance of $1,800. In October of the same year, a 27-year-old woman named Pauline Otten jumped out of the window of her 9th floor room. Just before she jumped, she'd been inside the room arguing with her husband, whom she was estranged from. And as he left the room, he just kind of left out in a huff. He slammed the door, left the hotel, and after he had left her, she jumped out the window. And this case gets even worse and more heartbreaking. So not only did she die as a result from falling and hitting the floor, she'd also landed on a 65-year-old passerby. His name was George Giannini, killed him on impact. And at first, the way that investigators had discovered the bodies, it looked like the pair had committed suicide together, but they ruled this out and they kind of were able to determine what had actually happened, since there had been no witnesses to Pauline jumping and landing on George. So it was only when they realised that George still had his hands in his pockets and was still wearing his shoes, which would have likely fallen off if he had committed suicide, that they realised that he was just caught in the crossfire. In June of 1964, a retired telephone operator who went by the name Pigeon Goldie Osgood was found dead in her hotel room by an employee. She had been a well-known pillar of the community, as she was known to spend her days feeding the pigeons in a place called Pershing Square, which was relatively near to the hotel, hence how she earned the nickname. Investigators had discovered that she had been sexually assaulted, stabbed and beaten before her room was searched and torn apart. Obviously they didn't know if anything had been stolen because they didn't know what she'd had with her, but this was a very, very brutal attack on someone who seemed to be very well loved in the local area. Close to her body, police discovered her LA Dodgers cap that she was known to wear, as well as a paper bag full of bird feed. And just a few hours later, a man named Jacques, or Jax, I'm really bad at pronunciation, I'm really sorry, B. Alinger, I'll put the name on the screen. He was spotted walking through Pershing Square, where she was known to spend her days, covered in blood-stained clothing, absolutely drenched in it. And he was ultimately arrested for the murder of Osgood, but was later cleared all charges, which is very, very strange. There's not a lot of information on that. So if I can find some more details, I'll leave them down below. And sadly, her murder remains unsolved to this day. 11 years later, in December of 1975, an unidentified woman jumped from her 12th floor window. She had checked into the hotel using a fake name and sadly remains unidentified to this day. And then on February 19th, 2013, the strange case of Elisa Lam took place in the Cecil Hotel. And this case in particular remains to this day one of the strangest and most unusual crimes or occurrences ever recorded. Many people still speculate and talk about it to this day. I'm sure a lot of you, if you're interested in like true crime cases and watch a lot of YouTubers who cover those sort of content, then I'm sure you are very familiar with this case. So there are definitely some very, very details and very, very well covered videos on this already on YouTube, so I will link some of the best ones that I can find in the description so you can actually do this case justice, I guess. Obviously I'm not going into too much detail in this video for the sake of keeping it at a decent length, so if you want to watch a detailed video on exactly what happened, then check out the videos that I link below. So essentially 21-year-old Elisa Lam was found dead in one of the water supply tanks on the roof of the Cecil Hotel. She had been missing for 3 weeks before this point, and initially when her body was found it was ruled as an accidental drowning, but then all of these things started coming out that made it more and more strange and very, very unlikely that it was an accident. So in particular there was some very, very, it's quite infamous CCTV footage of Elisa Lam in an elevator, and she was acting really, really strange. So she would continually press all of the buttons inside the elevator. She would like peer out in the hotel of the open elevator doors as though looking for someone down the corridor, and then she would suddenly jolt into the corner and hide like she was hiding from someone in the corridor, but the elevator didn't move. It was all very strange, as well as the big question of how she ended up in the water supply tank. It's not something that you just happened to fall into, because obviously they're sealed. And since this case has kind of been very, very well known, there have been a lot of theories and suggestions and people speculating what could have happened, and these theories range from everything from like drug use, foul play, and some even suggested that the medication that she was on for her bipolar disorder had some sort of play in her death. But like I said, I'll leave a lot of detailed, very, very well carried out videos down below. In June of 2015, a 28-year-old male was found dead outside on the street outside of the Hotel CECIL. Very little was released about this specific case, including his identity and his exact cause of death, so we don't know whether to rule this as a suicide or something else had happened, whether there was foul play involved. But it just adds to, obviously, the very, very extensive list of strange deaths and sad, heartbreaking occurrences that had taken place on the property of this hotel. And as well as these strange deaths, like I said, all these awful occurrences that actually happened in the hotel, there are also some ties to some well-known murderers and other murder cases that are kind of interesting, that are worth noting. So the first off is that it was known to home or be resident to a couple of serial killers before they were sort of discovered and everything. So this includes Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger, who allegedly stayed in the hotel for quite a significant period of time. One was in 1985 and the other in 1991. So this is obviously quite a dark link as well. And the hotel is also allegedly linked to Elizabeth Short, who was the murder victim known as the Black Dahlia, which I'm sure a lot of you, again, if you're interested in true crime cases, I'm sure you're familiar with the Black Dahlia murder case. She was allegedly spotted in the bar of the hotel a couple days before her death. So again, another dark link. This has never been proven, however, because obviously it was just relying on witness statements. But yeah, it's kind of something else to discuss there. So yeah, that is everything I'm going to discuss today. I know this was a very dark video, but it's very, very strange to have one hotel not even be open for that long or that long a period of time, and have so much darkness and so many bad, strange occurrences happen within those years. It's very, very odd, and I thought it was a little bit interesting to discuss, since I know personally I'd heard of the hotel before, but I wasn't aware by any means of the full extent of these strange things that happened across its lifetime. So I hope you found this interesting. Leave any of your requests down below, and I will see you guys soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.